The most dangerous thing she ever did not involve a gun. It did not happen in an alley, and it did not end with violence in the street. It happened inside a courtroom. In a city where silence protected survival, she chose to speak. That choice would follow her longer than any crime ever could. Harlem remembers its kings. It remembers the men whose power arrived loudly, with fear and force. It rarely remembers the woman who challenged power without violence. This story does not end with arrest. It ends with how history chose to forget her. Her name was Stephanie St. Clair. Long before Harlem became famous, it was crowded and closed off. People arrived with hope, but found limits everywhere. Banks refused loans, insurance companies denied coverage, and jobs were unstable. Protection depended on who you knew. Money still moved, but not through official systems. Where institutions refused to operate, informal systems took their place. The numbers game filled that space. It is often described as gambling, but in reality, it functioned like an underground financial network. Small bets created daily cash flow, and regular payouts built trust. Stephanie St. Clair did not rush into this world. She watched it carefully. She observed who survived police raids and who disappeared after drawing attention. She noticed how loud operators fell quickly, while quiet ones lasted longer. The pattern was clear. Noise attracted pressure, but silence created space. By the early 1920s, she entered the numbers economy, not as a runner, but as a banker. She handled money, she absorbed risk, and she set limits. This placed her above daily chaos and closer to structure. Her operation was deliberate. Roles were separated, and information was limited. No single person knew everything. Runners collected bets, controllers verified numbers, and collectors paid winnings. Each person could be replaced, but the structure could not. Her influence grew quietly. It did not announce itself. It did not demand recognition. It simply worked. Police pressure was constant in Harlem. Raids were routine, and arrests followed patterns. Operators who paid protection money were often left alone. Those who did not were targeted. Stephanie St. Clair paid, but she also recorded names, amounts, and timing. She noticed patterns others ignored. As her operation expanded, so did attention. Organized crime saw opportunity. Large amounts of cash moved daily, and the system was profitable. Offers arrived quietly. Messages passed through intermediaries, with warnings disguised as advice. Join or be absorbed. Stephanie St. Clair refused to engage, not with anger and not with negotiation. She stayed silent. In the early 1930s, New York began investigations into law enforcement practices. Many in the underworld stayed quiet because speaking publicly carried risk. Stephanie St. Clair made a different choice. She entered the courtroom. She testified, alleging extortion and selective enforcement by some police officers. She described protection payments and explained how pressure was applied. She spoke carefully, without emotion. That moment changed everything. Investigations followed, and disciplinary action was taken against several officers. Silence no longer protected her. Law enforcement scrutiny increased, and raids became more frequent. At the same time, outside pressure intensified. Organized crime moved more openly into Harlem. Smaller operators were overwhelmed. Stephanie St. Clair did not respond with violence. She disrupted quietly. Bettors were redirected. Prices were undercut, and confidence eroded. Over time, outside involvement diminished. There was no announcement, just absence. This moment revealed something important. Harlem was not unguarded. It was disciplined. By the late 1930s, constant scrutiny and conflict took a toll. Her marriage became unstable and public. It was not strategy. It was vulnerability. In 1938, a violent domestic confrontation ended with a gunshot and arrest. This was the point of no return. Public attention shifted away from her public actions to her private life. She was convicted and she was imprisoned. For the first time, the system she helped shape operated without her. By every normal measure, this should have been the end. Stephanie St. Clair understood that silence, once broken, could never fully return. After the courtroom testimony, the balance she had carefully maintained for years began to weaken. The system around her did not react with noise or confrontation. It reacted with patience. Scrutiny increased. Police presence became more frequent, and raids happened closer together. Minor violations were treated as serious offenses. This was not an attempt to shut down the numbers economy. The numbers continued. This was about pressure. She had seen this before. When institutions could not remove someone directly, they made survival difficult. Every decision required more effort, and every mistake carried a greater cost. Still, the system functioned. Cash moved daily. Bets were placed and payouts were expected. But fear entered places once governed by routine. Runners hesitated, and collectors questioned loyalty. Trust, the foundation of everything, began to thin. Stephanie St. Clair responded by tightening control. Access was reduced. Information was limited further, and communication became cautious. The structure grew more disciplined, but also more rigid. It survived, but flexibility faded. At the same time, attention from outside Harlem increased. The end of Prohibition had changed the criminal landscape. Organized crime groups searching for new income looked toward Harlem's numbers economy. It was cash-heavy, deeply rooted, and resistant to outside control. What had changed was visibility. Stephanie St. Clair was now known, and known figures attract challenge. Approaches arrived quietly. Messages came through intermediaries, with offers framed as protection or partnership. Warnings were disguised as advice. The meaning was clear. Join or be absorbed. Stephanie St. Clair refused. She did not argue, she did not threaten, and she did not explain. She remained silent, but silence no longer signaled neutrality. It signaled resistance. Eventually, patience ended. Dutch Schultz moved openly into Harlem. Storefront operations appeared, and the strategy relied on scale. Smaller operators were pressured. Competition became visible and aggressive. This was meant to be seen. Stephanie St. Clair did not respond publicly. She avoided confrontation, and instead she disrupted quietly. Bettors were redirected. Prices were undercut, and confidence in the new operations weakened. At the same time, law enforcement attention shifted toward those storefronts. Raids followed. Costs increased, and arrests disrupted daily operations. Schultz's involvement grew expensive, then unstable. Over time, his direct presence diminished. There was no declaration of victory, only absence. This moment revealed something important. Harlem was not unprotected. It was organized. Discipline, applied quietly, could withstand pressure longer than force. But discipline required enforcement. As the environment grew more aggressive, enforcement became more visible. Boundaries had to be defended, and disputes had to be contained. This role expanded. Administration, once the center of power, began to recede. Presence mattered more than structure. The system was changing. Stephanie St. Clair noticed the shift. She understood it. Power adapts to pressure. Systems evolve not by choice, but by necessity. Then the pressure crossed into her private life. Years of scrutiny and constant threat took a toll. Her marriage became unstable and public. It was no longer separate from her work. It became a weakness. In 1938, a violent domestic confrontation ended with a gunshot and an arrest. This was not a calculated decision. It was not strategic. It was personal. The incident changed everything. Public attention shifted away from her business to her private life. The narrative hardened. and complexity disappeared. She was convicted, and she was imprisoned. The silence she once used as a tool now belonged to the state. Outside prison walls, the numbers economy continued. Cash still moved, and bets were still placed, but leadership fragmented. Without her oversight, authority dispersed. The system grew louder and less restrained. The environment now favored visibility over discipline. While Stephanie St. Clair served her sentence, Harlem reorganized without her. Decisions were made independently, and alliances formed without her consultation. The system did not pause. By the time prison doors closed behind her, the structure she helped shape no longer required her presence. By every normal measure, this should have been the end. Power lost, influence reduced, and control gone. But the story was not finished, because the final judgment of her life would not be made in the streets or even in the courtroom. It would be made later, quietly, in memory. Prison does not care who you were. It does not respond to reputation, and it does not remember influence. Inside, everyone answers to time. When Stephanie St. Clair entered custody, the system she had spent years shaping stopped responding to her completely. There were no intermediaries, no trusted messengers, and no quiet adjustments behind the scenes. Only routine. Morning counts, night counts, and days measured without decisions. For someone who lived by anticipation and control, this was not just confinement, it was removal. Time became the final force. Outside the prison walls, Harlem did not pause. It never does. Cash continued to move, and bets were still placed. The numbers economy survived because it was built to adapt, but it adapted without her. Without centralized discipline, the structure changed. Authority fragmented, and enforcement expanded. The system grew louder, more visible, and less restrained. Where silence once carried weight, presence now mattered more. This was not succession. It was transformation. By the time Stephanie St. Clair was released, Harlem was no longer arranged for her return. There were no networks waiting, and no hierarchy to reclaim. The silence she once used as strategy now surrounded her. She did not announce herself. She did not attempt to reclaim influence, and she did not challenge the new order. She watched, and she understood. The environment that once required her skills had passed. After prison, she lived quietly. She stayed away from the underworld she once helped organize. She pursued small business efforts and moved through the city without attention. This was not exile. It was absence. History often celebrates outcomes, not infrastructure. It remembers visible violence, not quiet administration. Stephanie St. Clair did not fit the story history likes to tell. She was not a flamboyant figure, and she was not a symbol built for admiration. She built systems, and systems are invisible until they fail. This is how erasure begins, not with denial or destruction, but with omission. As years passed, accounts of Harlem's underworld narrowed. Stories focused on the men who followed, on spectacle, and on names that were easy to repeat. Administrative power faded from memory. Quiet influence became harder to explain. Stephanie St. Clair's role became secondary, then optional, and then absent. Evidence was never missing. Court transcripts remained, and newspaper articles remained. Evidence was there, but attention was not. It is important to confront the full truth of the system she helped run. While the numbers economy provided employment, it also caused harm. It encouraged dependency, and it contributed to loss. Recognizing her organization and skill does not erase that harm. Both truths must exist together. This is where moral certainty breaks down. Was she protecting her community or mastering a system that exploited it? The answer is not simple. She operated illegally, but she challenged institutional pressure. She provided structure where formal institutions refused to operate. She was neither a hero nor a caricature. In her final years, there was no spotlight. In 1969, she died quietly. There were no headlines and no public reckoning. The city simply continued forward. Today, her name survives only in fragments, footnotes in stories centered on others. But those fragments align. They reveal that before Harlem's most visible figures, there was structure. Before noise, there was discipline. And before legends, there was organization. The most effective way to remove someone from history is not to destroy them. It is to stop saying their name. Stephanie St. Clair was not defeated publicly. She was rendered unnecessary. And when a system no longer needs its architect, it stops remembering them. Her story does not end with prison. It ends with forgetting. And that may be the most unsettling legacy of all.